this is Dawson Gage. We're making this video from 515 Orange Street, also known as the Big House, also known as the most extraordinary and eternal and prolific and cosmopolitan Taoist ashram, abbot, church, citadel, chapel, whatever you want to call it. This is a religious building where I play music to the ghosts, and the ghosts deliver the music and distribute it around the world, past, present, and future. When in doubt, play Taylor Swift. I can never, ever, ever repay my debt to Taylor Allison Swift, because I, once upon a time, around the time, but it was just a few days after the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis, when things went off in Wilmington and the police treated me like, pretty much like they treated George Floyd. In that time, when my enemies were shoulder to shoulder up on 3rd Street protesting, pretending to oppose white supremacy, Dawson was here fighting for his life and trying to make a stand against white supremacy. So what did I do? I took my sidewalk chalk and I went out on the sidewalk in front of my house along Orange Street here on the 500 block, and I wrote some messages aimed at the sky, which were that there were a power in the sky. That power would be able to observe and to read and to discern the message. One of the messages, written in bold, beautiful lines, was, "Taylor Swift, help me. Taylor Swift, help me." And what should happen? And around that same time, I recorded a live, sort of rough lo-fi record album with a few songs, with a few sort of well-chosen songs for Taylor Swift, and put it on my SoundCloud as an SOS to Taylor Swift, wherever she may have been. Since that time, being not necessarily the only tortured poet on the planet, as Adrienne Rich, the great Adrienne Rich said, poet Adrienne Rich said in one of her later poems, she said, poets don't go to jail except for women and colored poets. And if you interpret it with the right slant, that obviously applies to yours truly. The exception that proves the rule, and the law that gives definition to the exception. So after being tortured as a poet and being a tortured poet here in Hanover County and elsewhere in North Carolina, and being tortured and tormented and dragged and trafficked and abused and absolutely devastated and decimated by the state for no other reason than to preserve white supremacy and to inflict sadistic wounds on somebody who raised his hands against it and his voice as well. I put the message on sidewalk chalk, on the sidewalk with chalk, saying, "Taylor Swift, help me." And then I put the Taylor Swift SOS live lo-fi record on mixtape on SoundCloud. And it was about 3 years later that Miss Swift, mostly coming out of London, but also other places in the world, and as Taylor Swift tours the world, exploding all over the place, apparently not doing anything to do with Dawson, and apparently, operating on a totally different wavelength, as they might say, out of one's league. But no. The contemporaries, Dawson Gage and Taylor Swift, were not only playing in the same league, basically in a league of their own, actually, but maybe there's a few others, but in any event, Dawson Gage and Taylor Swift playing in the same league. Dawson on Orange Street in the middle of Wilmington, fighting for his life, surrounded by enemies, police informants, snitch puppets, and other operatives of the state, formal and informal. Dawson decides to send out what some people would call a Hail Mary, what some people would call a forgiveness prayer, which others would call an SOS, and others would call mental illness. Nevertheless, I did it. I sent the SOS to Taylor Swift, and Taylor Allison Swift decided to do something to help me. She recorded her album, The Tortured Poets Department, which has songs which are unmistakably, at least if you believe in reading and hermeneutics and interpretation at all, if you see meaning anywhere at all and think that songs contain meanings, sometimes not declared or obvious, if you believe in poetry and if you believe in music, and I certainly do, and I know Taylor Swift does too, if you do, then you will see that the Tortured Poets Department is about Dawson Gage and the struggle for world communism against white supremacy. How do I know this? Now, pretty baby, I'm humming back onto you. Fresh out the slammer, I know my first call will be too. That's just a tease. This is Dawson Gage speaking spontaneously with a freestyle, political, literary, musical message, and shouts out to Taylor Swift, but also all you other sisters who ought to recognize that there are other women on this earth, and some of them obviously love me because they wrote mega multi-platinum albums about yours truly, poet and journalist Dawson Gage.